Morant with a running start. Oh, it dunks! Oh, my goodness!
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone! Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it! A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant! He hit it! John Morant! Insanity!
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. I'm excited about today's episode because I'm joined by Michael Blevins, who directed the brand new Marc Gasol Memphis Made documentary. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. I say I'm excited about this episode because I'll be real. There's been some episodes this year, not that excited to do. So your movie that came out was definitely a bright spot in the Grizzlies season. Of course, on Saturday, April 6th, the Grizzlies will retire Marc Gasol's jersey. There will be a whole ceremony. And so the documentary was released ahead of that to build excitement, also to honor Marc Gasol. I'll start with just how did this whole project come about?
So I think it goes back to the Zebo one had a lot of success. We did a documentary surrounding Zach Randolph's jersey retirement, and Mark loved it, Mike loved it, Zebo loved it. Zebo actually, not to get off on a tangent, but Zebo had told me that after it came out, you know, when you do something like this, you wonder what the interest level is going to be, or like the people involved going to care and everything. And Zebo had told me that his younger son, who had never seen him play, was just watching on loop. So we knew like there was like an interest level and the guys involved liked it. But I know Mark does not like watching or talking about himself, as people are learning this week. So once the Zebo one was done, you know, I would joke with him every now and then, talking to him like, you know, you're probably up next, or, you know, you're pretty close. So we had talked, the organization obviously talked to him about during the summer what his timetable with everything was. And I had said, you know, if it's going to happen this year, we need to start getting some interviews. So just so you're not surprised, I'm going to talk to, so I talked to Nick Nurse at Utah Summer League, talked to Conley at Vegas, Zebo in Vegas, Chris Wallace in Vegas, Danny Green in Vegas, and there were a couple others maybe. And we started stacking them up. And then once we got in the season, it was clear we were going to do it this year, obviously later in the year. So that's kind of where it started. And, you know, the editing really started in January once we got pretty much all the interviews. And I believe the last interview was probably Dave Yeager, Kevin Durant. And then at that point, it was we had everything. It was kind of like lock the door and get to editing on this.
Yeah. So do you think that it went easier with Mark because you had the proof of concept of the Zebo documentary? Because I could imagine maybe if you started off with like, hey, Mark, we're going to do a documentary about you. He'd be like, no, thanks. But with this, you had the Zebo one. We're like, hey, man, you're up next. And so he's like, all right, they did a good job. I'll be okay with this.
Yeah, I think so. But just because it's such a unique thing, like it's not like a short video or whatever. But me and Mark have a really good relationship. And I have the same one with Mike. And then obviously mine has grown with Zebo and with Tony over these projects. But Mark, we follow each other on social media, so he'll compliment me on certain things. Like he is very in tune to the Grizzly stuff in general. But he'll see all our intro videos from my social pages. He'll see like the Dylan Brooks tribute video from there. He enjoyed that one. So he trusted me on it. And that was the whole thing. Like sometimes I would be overcautious. I'd be like, hey, we're getting so-and-so. Do you want to see? That's a big thing in this where Zebo was really good about it, because once we did his interview at a restaurant for his documentary, once the interview is over with, that's the thing about these documentaries. And I think Mark was the same way. And Mark has trusted me, so he understands this, that like once your interview's done, unless it's funny, the Kim Mulkey thing happened, right? Where she had a bunch of, she knows the questions that were getting asked to other people. So that's a game of telephone, right? And you know this as a journalist and stuff. when the subject gets asked the questions, they know what path you're going on, right? So when we did the Zebo one, he was like, "Oh, well, this is going to be great. Like, I know the questions he asked," and then he gave me a list of people I should talk to, right? So Mark was not big about that, and I'm like, "Is there anybody like I have to talk to?" And he wasn't. I mean, he knew who I was going to talk to, Mike and stuff. So that became a little more difficult on that in terms of, I guess difficult is not the right word, but it was kind of up to me on it. You know what I mean? And I think once we got cooking with it, he understood how good it was. And then there would be certain things where I would text him random times like, "Hey, is this Powell in this shot?" Because we were getting old footage, right?
Yeah.
Or you okay with us talking to this person? And it was always yes. But he was very collaborative on it. His team over in Girona was very helpful in terms of getting some of this footage, because getting the footage was not the easiest thing. And a lot of that we stumbled upon, and it was huge, especially like Jason Peters at Lausanne. That Lausanne footage,
Yeah.
that was some of my favorite stuff in it.
So if you haven't seen it, well, first of all, if you haven't seen it, you need to watch it because it's great. I assume you're listening to this because you're a Grizzlies fan, so you'll enjoy it if you haven't seen it. But also, I am going to talk about some of my favorite parts about this, so maybe they're spoilers. There were a few things that like I didn't know that were kind of eye-opening, and so I am going to say them on this podcast. So go ahead and pause the podcast, watch the documentary if you haven't yet. But some of the cool stuff is the actual footage, and maybe that's what I like in documentaries all the time. It's just when you show me, like, it's one thing to hear everyone's first-person recollections, but then like when you see like, hey, there's Mark in high school riding on a bus, like that's really cool. And then you see this stuff, you know, from when he's in the Spanish league and just any of the behind the scenes footage that we've never seen before, especially maybe some of Chris Wallace on draft night. More on that in a second. Like all that stuff's really, really cool. So yeah, that definitely, I thought, made this, made it pop, made it extremely engaging. But also when you're coming up with like maybe the direction of the documentary, like how did you begin to limit yourself? Because maybe the Zebo one's a little different, where it's like, here's Zebo on the Grizzlies. But for Mark, it's like, the Grizzlies are moving to Memphis, you know, and it's like, and so how did you limit yourself, or at least decide on the scope of what this Gasol project was going to be?
So my process typically is I'll open a Word document, and I'll basically start formulating what like the timeline of their career was. And for Zebo, it was real easy because it's like when I'm doing it, it's like it's the story of revenge / redemption, and that's like the easiest story to tell, right? Where revenge on the Clippers for discarding them, redemption for everything that happened. For Mark, it was a little more complex. And the hard thing about Mark at first, because I'm in the Zebo mindset, where it was like the Zebo documentary was like, he did this, he did this, he did this, he did this, and it kind of means this. For Mark, like we were interviewing Chris Harrington for it, and we were like, what's your favorite Mark player moment? And like Chris knows the Grizzlies like better than anybody else, and he's like, I don't know if I can really think of one outside that Spurs game winner, and they didn't win the series. So then it was like, yeah, there's not a lot of big plays or big moments, or maybe favorite plays or whatever. So then I'm starting to think like, what are the important things? Because obviously his ties to Memphis are important. And then I start thinking like, what is like should be the driving force behind this? What should be the thing that connects the story together? And the most interesting thing was the symbol for it was the ring he got at the end. Mm-hmm. Why did he get grit and grind in that ring? So if you work backwards from there, that can be like your guiding thing. Like I'm going to show you for an hour and 40 minutes why grit and grind was important to him, and thus grit and grind also is synonymous with Memphis. Why was Memphis important to him, and then why was Mark important to Memphis? And I think that was a guiding thing. And I knew as it was going, I was like, I'm not going to be able to explain it properly to everybody here, but I think at the end it's going to show his connection to Memphis, and every little detail mattered in it. That was the hope. Is like, you know, as a media, I'm like, do we really need to show Chris in the draft room? Do we need to talk about them coming to Memphis? And it's like, but it's all tied in, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the cool things I was hoping out of it was the documentary felt like Mark's personality, where it felt like you learned about him, but it was also like very sharing the basketball. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we talked about Zebo, we talked about all these other different people, and he's a fan first and then became a player. So I thought it was something that if he ever watches it, as we've learned this week, he still does not watch it because he does not love watching things on him. I think it's something where he'll feel like it's a lot in his temperament and tone.
Yeah. So you did like manage to make a 100-minute, feature length thing. How challenging was that to not have it be more of, I don't know, Peter Jackson doing the Beatles, like how challenging was it to limit it to an hour 40?
It's not the easiest thing. And one thing I've learned, just because a lot of stuff now you got to do it shorter, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's different, like Beyond Grid episodes we've done on Jaron, like when he came back from injury, I could do an hour-long thing on that, but people, Jaron or nobody wants an hour-long thing on him coming back from injury mid-season. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you got to figure out as you're doing it, I'm going to cut. Like I always use the phrase "when in doubt, take it out." So as I'm doing that, and then I think the first draft was an hour 47. So I really only trimmed like 5 minutes off afterwards, and a lot of those things I trimmed off were like stories like Jaron told at the end about them in Charlotte together, like not long-winded, but stories that don't have a B-roll and it's like 45 seconds long and it might reveal something.
Yeah.
So as I'm going back through it, I'm like, it really doesn't reveal anything more than what a previous person said. But yeah, it's difficult, but you watch some of the sports documentaries now, a lot of them don't need to be 6 parts. They don't need to be 2 hours long.
Yeah.
So I wanted this to feel like this was fast paced and you're learning something every second.
Yeah. There's some where it's like, and in this season, the Patriots won the Super Bowl. Next season, you're like, well, that was fast. Like,
the Patriots one was really, I watched the Patriots one before I started editing this. And they did a good job in terms of like, we don't want to get into too much of this season. So how do we wrap this season up? And I think I did a good job of that in terms of like, here's the 15th season in 45 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the dilemma. And then what do you do more long-winded on? So that's the tough part.
So there's not on the cutting room floor. Here's when Mark got Fizdale fired. Like that didn't. No,
I think we did a good job of telling that story.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like I didn't want it to be some sensational sideshow thing because it isn't. Because those guys talk today. They've like you said in the documentary, which we shot at the Basketball Hall of Fame. So when he was saying he saw him yesterday, basically it was like Dwayne Wade, Powell, and whoever else going in. So everybody was there.
Yes.
But I think that story is relevant, especially the Tony soundbite is relevant in telling the grit and grind story, right?
Yes.
And it's another thing that shows how important grit and grind and those 4 guys were to each other.
Yeah. Is there anything, like you said, just maybe it was a long-winded story, but was there any other like bigger sections or things that you really wish you could have included that you weren't able to because of time?
Not really. I mean, we probably could have gotten more on the Raptor stuff.
Yeah.
We didn't request Kawhi Leonard or Kyle Lowry. We could have done that. I mean, Danny was perfect because I at Summer League I texted Danny because we were trying to think of like different people.
That's Danny Green for the listeners,
yeah, Danny Green. And he was over at the Wynn, and you've been to Summer League, right?
Mm-hmm.
He walked from the Wynn over to Resorts World in about 110 degrees through the lobby, came to the interview. So I greatly appreciate Danny doing that. And it's like, oh, you were on the 11 Spurs, you were on the 17 Spurs, you were on the 19 Raptors. So he can talk about all 3 of those, and that's a huge thing to get. There really wasn't. I mean, I guess we could have talked more. Now the dilemma was we wanted to cover the Spanish national team, right?
Right.
And you're very limited on what you can do with Olympic and FIBA footage, right?
Oh yeah. They'll come after you on Twitter. Like, yeah, you can't post.
That's the last thing we wanted. So I could have gone more into that if we had additional footage. The Spanish national team gave us some footage. There were some photos, obviously, that we were clear in using. That was one we could have got. I mean, honestly, if they haven't already, they should do a documentary just on that team because they get lost in the shadows how good our team was during that reign. But they were the second best. And if we didn't have our stuff together here in the United States, they would have won multiple Olympic gold medals.
So one thing that I think as a big Grizzlies fan, I mean, I appreciate you calling me a journalist earlier, but whatever. as a big Grizzlies fan, maybe my favorite thing was seeing the draft night footage the night that Marc Gasol was drafted by the Lakers. And this got me thinking, well, if we have this footage, what other footage do we have? So my question is, what kind of amazing, using your previous adjective, salacious footage is there that we maybe could one day unearth watching Grizzlies draft nights of past?
Back in the day, they filmed a lot of them.
Uh-huh.
But there isn't. I mean, this one, honestly, we stumbled upon.
Yeah.
Because it was like, because they told the story. Chris Wallace told the story at Summer League. He was the first person to tell the story. And I'm like, I wonder if there is even footage of that. And then Powell told the story about what he did. And Mark didn't know the story because Mark had asked me, and we didn't use it in the interview because, again, the documentary gone way too long. He was wondering, like, what pick was he trying to chase? Like, when he was doing it, and stuff like that. So the footage was interesting. That happens a lot when you're doing something like this. You just stumble upon something. Like a little small one we stumbled upon was talking about, and I think it was important to cover this, is how there was excitement when the team came here, right? And were you living here during that time?
I have always lived in Nashville, but I became a Grizzlies fan. I declared myself a Grizzlies fan when it was announced they were coming to Memphis. So like I went to games the first year where I was like, I was around, sort of.
So there was excitement at first, and then it just kind of it died down a little bit, right? Because there wasn't. I mean, this happens a lot with expansion teams. It was essentially an expansion team, right? So I wanted to showcase that, and then I was like telling our archivist Justin, I was like, dig through some of the old tapes, right? Because those old years are just on tapes. We're going to digitize them soon, so it becomes easier. I was like, find some empty shots, and he just found this. And this is what I love in documentaries is when there's like it's called over the air, right? When something's not on program and not going out, but you hear the announcers. And I forget who the announcers were at the time, but they're like, hey, ain't nobody here tonight, basically, right? And he called me and he's like, you got to come see this. And I'm like, that is awesome. So there's a lot of stuff you can stumble upon. But yeah, that's an outlier to see like a GM trying to chase a pick and stuff like that. And I mean, everything works out. Everything worked out pretty well. Like if you get Mark there, like maybe you don't get Zebo. And then
that part's that part's definitely true. The footage is just amazing because it's involving famous players and maybe Hall of Fame player where it's like Chris Wallace is trying to trade for the pick to get Marc Gasol in the second round because Powell said, go draft my brother. And then the other amazing thing that I think everyone's talking about that I consider this a sort of spoiler, if you haven't been like on social media, is like Powell trying to convince Chris Wallace to still trade for Mark's draft rights after the draft and throughout that next season. And like the Lakers apparently wanting $500K for the draft rights and the Grizzlies being like, no, we can't do that. And then Powell being like, oh, but can I pay for it? And they're like, nope, you can't do it. And so all of us are like, what? You could have had Marc Gasol for that. But then of course, whatever, maybe no Zebo, maybe no, the whole grit and grind era is one sequence of like accidental mistakes. I guess you can debate that if you're Chris Wallace, how much of it was planned? Like I knew Mark was good, or I brought Tony in for this reason, or we knew Zebo was going to be good when he got here. But all that's great. What kind of response have you gotten from this release so far? Just among have other players bothered to watch it or other executives? Have you had any feedback from those people?
Some of our basketball ops people have messaged me about it, talking about how much they liked it. I'm sure. I think with the Zebo one, the fun thing was like as the years progressed, people were like, "Oh, I just watched it." I think this one is a little more interesting. Obviously, everybody's in the height of the season. I haven't talked to Santi. Santi is the biggest Gasol brothers fan ever. I'm sure he's gonna see it. But yeah, I think it will. I don't think I was texting with Mike this weekend. I don't think Mike has seen it yet, and I don't know if Zebo has. Tony hasn't yet. But it is. What's
Tony's excuse?
Vernon's working him too hard.
Okay, all right.
He had to prepare all his Marc Gasol questions for yesterday.
That's right. Yeah, I was laughing about seeing Tony Allen and Marc Gasol were on the Chris Vernon show earlier this week, and it was pretty funny again as they reminisce over the Xavier Henrys and Hashim Thabits of the world. What's a Grizzlies movie that you wish you could make? Like, I assume, I mean, I don't think it's a secret. We assume we got a Mike Conley on the way, maybe a Tony Allen on the way, but like, what's maybe an off the beaten path? Maybe some footage you stumbled upon where you're like, that's the Grizzlies movie I'd really like to make if I had all the time in the world.
I'll say this might be a cheating answer.
Yeah.
But if/when we win a championship, that would be a fun one to do, right? Especially because of this.
That's a cheating answer, Michael.
That's a cheating answer? Because
that's not off the beaten path.
Well, my favorite player growing up, because I went to LSU, was Stromile Swift.
Oh.
The Stromile Swift one would be interesting because I don't know anything about Stromile Swift other than he played at LSU, he was on Sweet 16 team, and then played here, played for the Rockets, great dunker. But he was, you go back through his old highlight stuff. Jay Will would probably be the really interesting one. Is there a Jay Will documentary?
There needs to be. I mean, both
Hubie
of those
Brown.
guys.
Hubie
You could
Brown
do, I would say, my personal fandom, I would say, maybe you could make the Stro Show half-hour one. I don't know how much a feature you might. Maybe you can uncover some great stories. My recollections of Stromile was hearing like news stories about like, hey, Stromile has secretly expressed how much he doesn't like playing basketball, and you're like, yeah, I get that. But his highlight package, unparalleled. There was a while there where I felt like the dunk of him over Yao Ming was being scrubbed from the internet, where you just couldn't find it. Where I was like, is our nations involved that we can't find this Stromile dunk over Yao Ming? No, I think a Jason Williams one would be incredible. You could even weave in the Hubie Brown stuff because he's like this big flashy player. Of course, that's him. Also, the Grizzlies coming to Memphis. There's the Mike Bibby for Jason Williams trade, and like he sort of transformed his game with Hubie. He was still flashy, but all of a sudden he started having great assist to turnover numbers. That's a pretty good one. Yeah,
we had talked to Hubie. Obviously, he's in the documentary. But we asked him a bunch of different questions, and we used different things when we went to Atlanta probably 2 or 3 months ago. And he talked a lot about Jay Will and how much, he liked him, and he thought he got unfair flack from a lot of people, especially back then. I think what Hubie and Jay Will did here, and then what Jay Will did in Miami, I think kind of like, forced the media not to stick to the rhetoric on, he's just a flashy passer and everything.
Yeah. I also feel like they waived an NBA rule for him because it used to be like if a guy gets traded, you can't waive him and then rejoin the old team. That would be circumventing the trade. But it was at the very end of his career. And I feel like there was something where the league was like, yeah, that's fine. Jason Williams can go back to Memphis. He's not that good anymore or something. Yeah. I hope I haven't misremembered that. You can set me right when the documentary comes out. Here's an important question I have. And I assume most people wonder this. So you're the, I don't know what your exact title is with the Grizzlies. You do all the videos, basically. Is that right? And you're putting together, whether it's the pregame hype video for the Grizzlies, if it is a documentary like this, and even the tribute videos when a player comes back. Is my understanding correct, at least so far?
Yeah. I have a team of 6 under me, and we do all that. But in terms of editing wise, I'll be doing the Grizzlies intro videos and tribute videos like that too.
So my huge question is, and I want to know if other teams, if you like communicate with other video directors or coordinators with other teams, like what is the standard, and is there one league wide to which players get a tribute video? Because like I was there for the Tyus Jones tribute video. Okay, Tyus, several years on the Grizzlies, but that was nice. A very beloved figure. Also, like maybe one of my all-time favorite players, D'Anthony Melton. Yeah, that's right. D'Anthony Melton got a tribute video. So I'm curious, is there a league-wide standard / what is your standard for which players get a tribute video?
I always laugh on Twitter. It's become such a big deal about that, right? Like who gets one, and I think it's probably expanded a little bit more. Again, I think there are some players, and I've seen some from other teams, and I want to call out the players, that they probably saw that they got one and were a little embarrassed because it was like they were there for a year or two.
Yeah.
And it was like, and how a tribute video in my mind is usually formatted is like, here's some cool stuff. Here's him in the community. And then there is some more cool stuff at the end. So like, if you ain't been there that long, your community stuff might be like, you donate some socks or something. You know what I mean? Like I'm watching some of these videos, and I know from when I worked for the 49ers, like guys will see they will not love if a video, like, you'll just think in your mind, oh, I'll do a cool video on so and so player, right? Sometimes they get embarrassed because they're like, I'm not at that level. Like, I don't deserve that.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think some of these players in the league, and I think some of these teams and probably video departments are very eager because you get to know the guy and you want to do one for him. So in my mind, there's not probably like a real standard in that. I mean, like, Kawhi was there one year. He probably should have got the greatest tribute video in the history of the Raptors, right?
Yeah. I mean, not all years are created equal, you know.
No, definitely not. And I think Mark definitely deserved one with the Raptors.
Yeah.
From doing all these interviews, it's abundantly clear he deserved one there.
Yeah. So probably not a Kenneth Lofton Jr. video on Saturday for the 76ers. No, he's on the Jazz now, isn't he?
Is it?
Oh, he's on the Jazz now. I think that's too bad.
Jazz.
We missed it. We missed our chance. Is there anything else about the documentary you want people to know that we haven't covered? Because I commend you for it's incredibly engaging. And like for a lot of people, maybe you don't know all the stuff. I feel like I knew all the stuff, you know, but I was wrong. I come into it and there's a lot of stuff that surprised me. So that was really cool. Was there anything else you want people to know about the movie?
I think when I was when we did the Kevin Durant interview, I can give it away. I'll give you an exclusive right now. We asked him about Tony too, right? So we did, and that was kind of like the genesis of the interview, right? And we've done this with multiple guys. Again, it doesn't make sense with Mike because Mike's got, you know, a while. You can't retire somebody jersey and still play in the league, right? But we did it with the three guys for different interviews we did. And Kevin Durant was really, he was very willing to do it. He's a great guy. Like, he took time out before his, like, I don't know if he ended up playing that night, but still, it was like 30 or 40 minutes before tip when we played them, and he was willing to do it. And he did great answers about Tony and Mark, and he was just very, like, I guess the best way to phrase it is like proud as a basketball player that we were honoring these guys, that these guys matter a lot. You saw Chris Paul in the Zebo thing. You saw Matt Barnes, Steven Jackson. I think with Tony's, we're going to try to get more people like that. And I think it's going to be pretty easy. These guys matter. And there's a certain respect, and hopefully Memphis people understand that like, the way these guys played, especially as I'm going through the old footage, is like they played hard as whatever you want to say. And they were never disrespectful to their opponents, except for Zebo with that one guy. But there is a lot of respect around the league for those four guys. And like whatever the equivalent of Tony Allen is for another team, does Kevin Durant take time out of his day to do an interview for that? When I told him we were doing Mark this year, he was like, "Oh, that's awesome." And I was like, "Can I ask you a question?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." And I thought that was the best quote of the whole documentary, where you have one of the greatest players of all time saying, "I know they didn't win a championship, but they felt like a dynasty style team." And I remember as he's saying, I'm like, "Oh, I could put that in this segment. There'll be a perfect bridge into Mark talking about, you know, how grit and grind mattered to the city." And that Jeff Calkins quote tied with it perfectly. So hopefully everybody takes that away from this, is like, this team mattered. I was listening to it was like Jeff Calkins. I think he was talking to Chris Harrington. They're like, and Tim Bontemps was in it for some reason. And Tim was like, I really didn't. We had talked before, like at different events and stuff. But we didn't really know each other by name. But I saw him at the Hall of Fame. And it was important that I wanted to get somebody that could speak on a national stage about the team. Like, this is a national writer. And that could speak about the importance of Mark in the voting process for Defensive Player of the Year. But yeah, people should take away those four dudes matter a lot. And I tell you what, for Minnesota this year, I mean, you ain't got to convince anybody in Minnesota that Mike Conley matters a lot. So, and I think all those dudes are really excited for, you know, what they can do this year too. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Michael, for coming on. Congrats again on the documentary. Everybody go check that out. And I look forward to maybe you can come back on the next time we get one of these to drop.
Appreciate it.